beloved souls. I make space for what matters. Psychologist and psychotherapist Carl Jung used to say, the world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. And perhaps that reality is what has brought you here. Calendars that are overscheduled, competing sense of values. The world will be quick to tell you who you are if you do not know. But those of us following the Kriology philosophy have decided to live in light of the fact that we are divine beings having a human experience, that bliss is our birthright, that we're here for a purpose. And so this tenet, I make space for what matters, is going to be actually the most practical, the most tactical of the four pillars. So Kriology, Kriya actually comes from this, is a Sanskrit word, which means to do something. This is when we're going to do something to a desired end. So it's a purposeful doing. And this is the pillar where all of our intentional doing falls, because we know that we can have all of the ideas of what we want in life up in our head, but unless we embody them, unless we do them, unless we create space for them in our lives, nothing is going to change. So I make space for what matters is how we remember what is ours to do in this life in order to make the least resistance within ourselves for realizing and tasting and feeling the divine goodness, the divine presence that is always available to us, that peace, that enlightenment. So at a first and really practical level, this is going to include things like, hey, instead of working 80 hours a week and never seeing your family and never caring for your body and not getting enough sleep, we're going to do things, we're going to make space for the things like relationships, sleep, rest, nourishment, family time, friendships, recreation. These things are important. Without it, we cannot honor the human body. But there are other levels besides just time to this. There's also a physical space. Kriyananda actually talks about in order to meditate, in order to get the most out of our meditations, actually creating a space, a physical space that is set aside for meditation only. So that's one example. Our physical surroundings matter. The energy that we bring into our space matters. And so how tidy, how organized is our space? How cluttered is our space? Do the things around us bring us joy, or do they burden our spirits? These are all questions to ask ourselves. Also, what falls under this category is, are my consuming things that are set up to nourish me? So the books that I read, the movies that I watch, the podcasts I listen to, the things on my feed and the emails lists that I'm subscribed to, is this content that will edify and enrich and strengthen me? Or is this content not going to fall in the category of what matters, towards the end to which I am working, towards the end of realizing the bliss that is my birthright? You might also ask yourself, how am I going to consume the news? From whom am I going to consume the news? Am I going to consume the news? All of these are important things to consider. But in addition to the time on our calendar and the space in our physical space and what we put into our minds, there's also a heart space to be considered. So is there space in your life for the vocational or the avocational work that your soul is created to do? Is there time? Is there space? Is there the training? Is there the patience? Is there the spiritual discipline for the meditation that is the gateway? The study, the learning, the breath work, the pranayama, all of these things are part of it. And then finally, and this gets even more nuanced, in the yoga tradition, these things would be called the yamas and the niyamas. But what about things like, do you make space for truth-telling in your life? Sometimes the truth isn't as simple as just truth or lie. Sometimes it is about telling your truth to those with whom you're in relationship. What about simplicity, generosity, non-harming, self-sacrifice? We make space for those things too. And for all of these things that we discussed, there's an inviting in, but there's also a letting go in order to put one's house in order. So for example, this would be an active, like you might say, I'm going to create my dedicated meditative space. That's an inviting in. That's a proactive thing you want to add to your life. But then there's also a letting go that goes into I make space for what matters. I mean, just like in spring cleaning, we all know sometimes making space means cleaning out. And sometimes that means letting go of relationships that no longer are in alignment with who your soul is calling you to be. And, I say all these as tiny little phrases, yet, if you have tried to do any work, sure, creating a meditation space might just be a weekend project. Letting go of a relationship that no longer serves can take seasons and seasons and seasons. So, but all of this is about cleaning up, about setting ourselves up to most easily receive the grace that is available to us at all times, the bliss that is our birthright. I make space for what matters. So let me be clear, this is not intended to be an exhaustive list that right now you've taken notes and you're going to go put it all on your calendar or add it to your to-do list. You would very quickly get burnt out and lose your way. Know that this is a very, very long, probably lifelong, truthfully, process of it's actually like a spiral. So we learn and we relearn in a new way a lot of these same things. This is meant to show the breadth and the landscape of the intentionality in which we are building our lives. The care of our bodies, the care of our minds, the care of our souls, the care of our relationships, the care of our spaces, the care of our time. I make space for what matters. So one last thing before we wrap up for today is that the making space is what is ours to do. It is what is in our control. What we cannot control is the outcome. So often people think that they will work their way to the bliss, for example, by doing all of this stuff perfectly, that they will, that if they just work hard enough, they will be able to grasp the enlightenment or the kingdom of heaven that they're so yearning for. And actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Our job, the reason we do all these things, like I say, is to create a vessel that is as clean and as open as is possible, so that we're not clogging up the pathway. But it's like planting a flower garden where where our job is to create the container, to till the soil, to ensure the nutrients, to plant the seeds, to water the seeds. But at the end of the day, it is something way beyond our control that is the grace that makes the flower actually bloom. I've got an orchid plant right now that is resprouting and everything looked to be wonderful and it's got the tiny little buds on it, but I just don't think it's gonna flower. And I don't know why. I think the little buds are gonna die on the vine. And sometimes that happens. We can't make the flower happen. And so often we are graced with the flower. But we have to remember that it wasn't ourselves who created that bliss in our lives, that enlightenment, that spark of divine connection. And so to close out this illustration, to close out our time together talking about I make space for what matters, I want to read a little bit from one of the Christian dispensations of this mysticism, Richard Rohr. He writes, "The American Declaration of Independence says we have an unalienable right to the pursuit of happiness. God created us to be happy and joyful in this world and in the next. And Jesus says the same several times in the Gospel of John. The only difference between the two, the Declaration of Independence, this pursuit of happiness, and the fact that we are created to be happy in this world and the next, is that any happiness that is demanded from life never becomes happiness because it is too narcissistically and self-consciously planned. The joy that the world cannot give," and that's a quote from Jesus in John's Gospel, "the joy that the world cannot give always comes as a gift for those who wait for it, expect it, and make room for it inside of themselves. The first is an assertion, the second is self-surrender. The first is taking, the second is receiving. The two are entirely different human dynamics. You do not catch a butterfly by chasing it. You sit still and it alights on your shoulder. Then it chooses you. That is true happiness." So my friends, making space for what matters is akin to doing all of the things and letting go of all of the things so that the butterfly is able to choose us and we are able to bask in its bliss and its beauty. We are so honored to journey with you. Namaste.